The rain in the alley feels like ice, but it is nothing compared to the coldness in my father's eyes. I am huddled in the dirt, my knuckles bleeding as 3 low-level thugs kick me for the few crumpled dollars I earned hauling cement. I was a viper prince of the Gurion Empire once. I wore silk. Now I wear a hoodie that smells like grease and failure. From the mouth of the alley, a black limousine idles. My father, Nam-joon, watches through the tinted glass, the orange glow of a cigar the only light in the dark. He doesn't step out. He doesn't call them off. He just watches his only son crawl in the mud. They think I am a beggar, but they are dead wrong. While I have lived in this gutter for 3 years, I haven't just been surviving. I have been building. Every nobody in this city, from the dock workers to the street sleepers, now answers to me. My father thinks he is testing my strength, but I have already built a new empire in the shadows of his own. Tonight, the rival Iron Fang Syndicate is moving in to kill him, thinking the throne is empty. They are about to find out that the man in the dirty hoodie is the most dangerous person they have ever met. The test is over, and my reign begins. The sun beat down on the construction site, baking the dust and sweat into a thick crust on Kim-joon's skin. Every muscle in his body screamed as he hoisted another heavy bag of cement onto his shoulder. His hands, once soft and groomed for piano keys and luxury watches, were now a map of thick calluses and half-healed scars. For nearly 3 years, this had been his world, a relentless cycle of backbreaking labor and the stinging grit of poverty. He wiped his forehead with a ragged sleeve, glancing at the calendar pinned inside his locker. Today marked the final week. 1,000 days of silence from the Gurion Empire. 1,000 days of being a nobody. As the lunch whistle blew, a sleek, silver convertible roared to a halt near the site's entrance, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Kim-joon didn't need to look up to know who it was. The laughter was sharp and familiar, the sound of people who had never known a day of hunger. "Is that really him?" a voice mocked, dripping with disbelief. Kim-joon kept his head down, unwrapping a squash rice ball he had bought for less than $1. Through the corner of his eye, he saw his former friends, the same socialites who used to fight for a seat at his VIP tables. They stood by their car, dressed in linen suits that cost more than Kim-joon earned in a year, pointing and snickering as if he were an exhibit in a zoo. "Look at those hands," another one laughed, leaning against the polished door. "The Prince of Gurion has turned into a pack mule. Hey, Kim-joon, I've got some trash in my trunk. I'll give you $5 to haul it away. It's more than you make in an hour, right?" The construction workers around Kim-joon shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension, but Kim-joon remained as still as stone. He didn't feel the flash of hot rage he would have felt 3 years ago. Instead, he felt a strange, cold pity. They saw a broken man in a dirty hoodie, but he saw something else, a group of people who were only powerful because of their parents' names. He took a slow, deliberate bite of his rice. He didn't defend himself. He didn't beg them to stop. He simply watched the clock. The physical toll of the labor had been grueling, but the mental toll was the real forge. His father had sent him here to break his pride, but instead, the fire of poverty had burned away his arrogance, leaving behind something far harder and more dangerous. The convertible sped away, the passengers throwing a handful of small change into dirt near Kim-joon's feet. He didn't reach for it. He just looked at the dust settling on his scuffed boots and smiled a thin, predatory smile. The 3 years were almost over, and the world had no idea what was about to walk out of the shadows. The dust from the silver convertible had barely settled when a second vehicle, a heavy black SUV, lurched to a stop near the site's water station. Out stepped a man named Sang-woo. 3 years ago, he had been one of the many loyal followers who hovered around Kim-joon, begging for scraps of influence. Now, he wore a flashy, expensive suit and a gold watch that caught the afternoon sun. He had risen to become a mid-level enforcer for a minor branch of the syndicate, and his ego had grown twice as fast as his rank. Well, Sang-woo called out, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the entire construction crew. "I heard the rumors, but I didn't believe them. the crown prince of Gyeong, covered in dirt and smelling like a sewer. Kim-joon stood slowly, wiping his grimy hands on his jeans. The other workers moved back, sensing the danger that followed men like Sang-woo. The enforcer walked toward Kim-joon, his polished leather shoes clicking against the uneven ground. As he stepped over a puddle of muddy water, a small splash of gray sludge landed on the tip of his right shoe. Sang-woo stopped, looking down at the speck of dirt with theatrical horror. He then looked at Kim-joon, a cruel, jagged smile spreading across his face. "Look at this, Jun-ah," Sang-woo sneered, pointing at his foot. "These shoes cost more than your father gives you for a month of begging. Since you're already down in the dirt, why don't you make yourself useful?" He leaned back against the hood of his SUV and held his foot out. "Clean it. Now, maybe I'll tell the boys at the club that you're still a hard worker." A heavy silence fell over the site. The workers watched breathless. For the heir of an empire to kneel before a mid-level thug was the ultimate disgrace. But Kim-joon didn't hesitate. He moved with a grace that didn't belong in a construction site. Sinking slowly to one knee in the grit, he took a tattered rag from his pocket and began to wipe the mud from Sang-woo's shoe. "That's it," Sang-woo laughed, looking around at the crowd. "See? He knows his place." Kim-joon did look up, but a thin, terrifyingly calm smile played on his lips. As he moved the cloth, his eyes weren't on the leather. They were fixed on Sang-woo's face, tracing the lines of his features, the scar on his chin, and the way his pulse beat in his neck. He wasn't just cleaning a shoe. He was memorizing a target. He was recording every detail of the man's identity into a mental ledger that would soon be paid in full. When he finished, Kim-joon stood up and gave a polite, shallow bow. Sang-woo, feeling like a king, patted him mockingly on the cheek and hopped back into his car. As the SUV roared away, Kim-joon's smile remained cold, patient, and predatory. Sang-woo thought he had won a victory, but he had only signed his own death warrant. The Prince of Scraps was almost done playing his part. The smell of burnt coffee and cheap grease hung heavy in the air of the roadside diner. It was the kind of place where the floor was always sticky and the fluorescent lights flickered with a tired hum. Kim-joon sat in a corner booth, his back to the wall, watching the steam rise from a chipped ceramic mug. Across from him sat Nam-joon, looking like a god trapped in a cage of linoleum and formica. The older man's dark overcoat was worth more than the entire building, and the scent of his expensive cigar fought against the smell of frying onions. Nam-joon didn't touch his coffee. He simply watched his son with those piercing, observant eyes. He looked at Kim-joon's cracked fingernails and the faded bruise on his jaw from the encounter with Sang-woo. "The 3 years are almost up," Nam-joon said, his voice a low, melodic rumble. "You have lived like an animal. You've been mocked by fools and beaten by cowards. Is this truly the life you want?" Kim-joon took a slow sip of the bitter brew. "The life I want isn't found in a limousine, father. It's found in the truth." Nam-joon leaned forward, the red of his tie flashing like a warning light. "The truth is that you are starving. The truth is that the Iron Fang is growing bold because they think my heir is a broken man. I will make you an offer. Admit that you are too weak for this. Admit that the streets have defeated you, and I will end this test tonight. You will have your suits, your cars, and your throne back by dawn. All you have to do is say the words." The silence between them stretched thin. For a moment, the comfort of his old life called to Kim-joon, the warmth of a real bed, the weight of a gold watch, the power to make men tremble with a whisper. He looked at his roughened hands, then looked his father directly in the eye. "You didn't send me here to see if I could survive poverty," Kim-joon said quietly. "You sent me here to see if I would break. But I didn't break. I changed." He reached into the pocket of his worn hoodie and pulled out a small stack of crumpled, sweat-stained single bills. One by one, he smoothed them out on the table, counting them with a precision that was almost insulting. He left enough to cover the 2 coffees and a small tip for the waitress who had ignored him earlier. "The coffee is on me," Kim-joon said, sliding the bills toward his father. "Consider it a dividend from my new empire. He stood up, his posture straight and his gaze steady. He didn't wait for a response. He walked out of the diner and into the cool night air, leaving the most powerful man in the city sitting alone with a pile of dirty dollar bills. The test wasn't over because his father said so. It was over because Kim-joon no longer needed his father's permission to be a king. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that usually preceded a storm. Kim-joon was heading back to his cramped room when he heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering and a woman's stifled cry. It was coming from Mrs. Lee's small grocery store, the only place in the district that had offered him credit and a kind word when his stomach was empty. Inside, 3 men in leather jackets were kicking over crates of produce. Their leader, a man with a jagged scar across his knuckles, held a trembling Mrs. Lee by the apron. "The Iron Fang doesn't offer protection for a free old woman," he hissed. "You missed 2 payments. Now we take out your skin." Kim-joon stepped through the doorway, his silhouette framed by the flickering street lamp outside. "Let her go," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the thugs freeze. The leader barked a laugh, releasing Mrs. Lee. "Look at this hero. The construction rat wants to play savior? Get him, boys." The 2 underlings lunged. To a normal observer, it happened in a blur. Kim-joon didn't panic. He moved with the surgical precision of a man who had spent his nights practicing in the dark corners of abandoned warehouses. He stepped inside the first man's reach, using the thug's own momentum to send him crashing into a shelf of canned goods. Before the second could react, Kim-joon delivered a swift, sharp strike to his solar plexus, followed by a leg sweep that dropped him hard onto the linoleum floor. The leader's eyes widened. He pulled a switchblade, the steel glinting in the dim light. He swung wildly, but Kim-joon was already gone. He reappeared at the leader's side, grabbing the knife hand and applying a pressure point lock that forced the weapon to clatter to the ground. With a final controlled shove, Kim-joon sent the man sprawling into a pile of bruised fruit. "The Gyeryong territory used to have rules," Kim-joon whispered, looming over the fallen leader. "You don't prey on the weak. Tell your masters that the streets are watching." Terrified and gasping for air, the 3 men scrambled to their feet and fled into the night. Mrs. Lee clutched her chest, staring at Kim-joon as if seeing him for the first time. The tired laborer with the slumped shoulders was gone. In his place stood a man with the eyes of a king. "Kim-joon," she breathed, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" Kim-joon straightened his worn hoodie and began picking up the fallen oranges, his expression softening back into its humble mask. "Just a man who pays his debts, Mrs. Lee," he replied. But as he looked at his steady, unshakable hands, he knew the secret was out. He wasn't just surviving the slums anymore. He was reclaiming them. The rumors began as a whisper in the backrooms of illegal gambling dens and spread like wildfire through the city's dampest alleys. They spoke of a shadow in a worn hoodie, a man who moved with the grace of a ghost and hit with the force of a falling mountain. In the slums, he was becoming a myth, a silent guardian who appeared when the weak were pressed against the wall. But in the polished offices of the underworld, he was becoming a problem. Inside the glass wall headquarters of the Iron Fang Syndicate, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Maps of the city were spread across a mahogany table, marked with red circles where their collection crews had been intercepted. The reports were always the same: a single man, no weapons, and a fighting style that suggested elite military training or a high-level Mafia background. "He's making us look like amateurs," hissed the regional director of the Iron Fang, slamming a fist onto the table. "Our men are coming back with broken ribs and shattered egos. They're calling him the ghost of the gutter. I want him found." He pulled out a stack of high-denomination bills and tossed them onto the map. $500,000 for his head. I don't care who he is. Put a bounty out on every street corner. Tell the informants that if they see a laborer with hands too fast for his clothes, they call us immediately. Unknown to them, the ghost they were hunting was currently sitting on a rusted fire escape, eating a cold can of beans. Kim-joon watched the black SUVs of the Iron Fang cruise through the streets below. He saw the nervous glances of the lookouts and the way the air in the district had changed. The bounty had reached the streets within hours, and suddenly, every pair of eyes in the slums was searching for a payday. Kim-joon pulled his hood lower, obscuring his face. He found it darkly ironic. For years, the Iron Fang had mocked the Gyeonggi Heir, calling him a broken loser and a discarded trash. They believed the son of Nam-joon was rotting in a hole somewhere, too weak to hold a spoon, let alone a gun. They were spending $500,000 to find a man they laughed at every day. He wasn't afraid of the bounty. In fact, he welcomed it. The more the Iron Fang focused on the mysterious fighter, the less they looked at the movements of the working class. While they hunted a shadow, Kim-joon was busy weaving a net. He was no longer just an heir in hiding. He was a rising shadow, and the syndicate was walking straight into his darkness without even knowing his name. The cold rain of the slums had a way of soaking through even the thickest layers, but the chill Kim-joon felt today wasn't from the weather. He stood in the sterile, dimly lit hallway of a free clinic, watching through a glass partition as a young boy struggled to breathe. The child was an orphan from the docks, a boy who had shared his meager crust of bread with Kim-joon during the coldest nights of the first year. Now, the boy was fading, and the price of the surgery he needed was a mountain of cash that no labor could ever hope to earn. Kim-joon reached into the secret lining of his worn hoodie. His fingers brushed against cold, heavy metal. He pulled out a piece of his former life, a handcrafted, diamond-encrusted watch that bore the crest of the Gyeonggi Empire. It was worth more than the entire clinic and the street it sat on. For 3 years, he had kept it hidden as a safety net, a final connection to the prince he used to be. As long as he held the watch, he was still a man of the elite, just playing a part in the mud. He walked into a high-end pawn shop located on the edge of the district, a place where the rich want to hide their debts. The shopkeeper's eyes widened as the timepiece hit the velvet counter. He looked from the priceless watch to the man in the dirty jacket with roughened, scarred hands. "Where did a rat like you get something like this?" the man hissed, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Does it matter?" Kim-joon's voice was like a blade. "I want the full value in cash. Now, and I want it untraceable." The shopkeeper tried to lowball him, but one look into Kim-joon's steady, predatory eyes silenced a man. The deal was struck. Minutes later, Kim-joon walked back into the clinic with a heavy envelope. He handed it to the head doctor without a word, refusing to sign any papers or take any credit. As he stepped back out into the rain, he felt a strange lightness in his chest. The watch was gone. The last tether to his father's world, the last symbol of his entitlement and his backup plan, had been traded for a child's life. He looked at his bare wrist, where the tan line of his former life was finally fading. He was no longer a prince in disguise. He was no longer the heir waiting for his father's permission to return home. He was a man who belonged to the streets. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a victim of a test. He felt like a leader. He had shed his skin of gold and silk, and in its place, he had grown a heart of iron. The transition was complete. The Gyeonggi Empire would eventually get its king, but he wouldn't be the man they remembered. He would be the man the people chose. The shadows in the slums grew long and jagged as evening approached. But for Kim-joon, the air felt unusually still. He walked toward the small vegetable stall, where Hannah usually worked after her classes at the local night school. She was the only person who truly saw him, not as a prince and not as a ghost, but as a man. She was the one who had patched his wounds after the fight at Mrs. Lee's, and the one who had shared her meager soup when the winter was at its worst. When he reached the stall, his heart cold dropped into his stomach. The wooden crates were overturned. A single, familiar hair ribbon lay trampled in the mud. There was no sign of a struggle, only a small, cheap burner phone sitting on a pile of crushed cabbage. The phone vibrated almost immediately. Kim-joon answered it, his grip so tight the plastic casing groaned. "You've been a very busy shadow," a voice hissed over the line. It was the sharp, arrogant tone of an Iron Fang lieutenant. We looked into your territory. It turns out the ghost of the gutter has a weakness. A pretty little thing named Hannah. She's currently sitting in a cold chair at the South Wharf warehouse. If you aren't there in 20 minutes, we start sending her back to you piece by piece." The voice laughed, a sound of pure confidence. "Come alone, little hero. Bring that bounty on your head, and maybe we'll let the girl live long enough to watch you die." The line went dead. The Iron Fang believed they had found the perfect leverage. They thought they were baiting a stray dog by threatening its only source of kindness. They saw Kim-joon as a desperate man driven by emotion, someone they could easily surround and crush with numbers. They didn't see the change in his eyes. The warmth he had allowed himself to feel for Hannah didn't vanish. It transformed into a focused, icy resolve. He didn't call the police, and he didn't call his father. He stood in the middle of the empty street and took a deep, steady breath. The Iron Fang had made a fatal mistake in logic. They thought that by taking Hannah, they had found his leash. In reality, they had just removed his last reason to show mercy. As Kim-joon turned toward the docks, his stride was no longer that of a burdened laborer. He moved with the silent, lethal purpose of a predator returning to the hunt. The rivals believed they were setting a trap for a victim, but they had actually opened the door for a wolf. Tonight, the South Wharf wouldn't be a trap. It would be a graveyard. The Gyeryong estate sat atop the hill like a fortress of glass and steel, guarded by men who were paid to be ghosts. For 3 years, Kim-joon had only seen these gates in his dreams or from the window of a passing bus. Tonight, he didn't wait for the gates to open. He scaled the perimeter wall with a fluid, practiced strength that his former, pampered self never possessed. As he dropped onto manicured lawn, the hum of high-tech security sensors filled the air. Within seconds, 4 elite guards in black tactical gear intercepted him, their weapons drawn and lasers painting red dots across his chest. These were the men who had trained him since he was a child. They knew his face, but they didn't recognize the man standing before them. "Halt!" The lead guard barked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then he froze. "Young master?" Kim-joon didn't stop walking. He didn't raise his hands. He moved toward them with a steady, terrifying confidence. The guard, hardened by 100 street wars, instinctively stepped back. They saw the holes in his hoodie and the dirt under his fingernails, but they also saw the way he carried himself. He didn't look like a disgraced prince begging for a way back in. He looked like a king coming to collect a debt. "I am not here for my father," Kim-joon said, his voice cutting through the night air like a blade. "And I am not here for his mercy. Move." The guards looked at each other, paralyzed by a mixture of duty and fear. There was a lethal sharpness in Kim-joon's eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Without another word, they lowered their weapons and parted like the Red Sea, watching in stunned silence as the disgraced heir walked to the front doors of the mansion. He ignored the grand staircase and the portraits of his ancestors. He went straight to the private armory in the basement. He bypassed the modern rifles and the piles of gold bars, stopping instead before a simple black lacquered box. Inside lay a signature blade forged from folded steel, its hilt wrapped in worn leather. It was a viper's tooth, a weapon passed down to the heir who proved they understood the cost of blood. Kim-joon gripped the hilt. The weight felt perfect. He didn't feel the need to look for his father, who he knew was watching through the security cameras. He didn't need to explain himself. He tucked the blade into the hidden sheath of his tattered jacket and walked back out the way he came. As he passed the guards again, the lead man lowered his head in an involuntary bow. Kim-joon didn't acknowledge it. He had what he came for. He had the steel of his past and the strength of his present. Now, it was time to show the Iron Fang what happened when a prince stopped playing games and started a war. Kim-joon stood on the rooftop of a crumbling apartment building, the weight of the viper's tooth steady against his back. Below him, the city lights flickered, but his focus was on the darkness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered, cheap burner phone. He didn't dial a high-ranking general or a Mafia captain. Instead, he sent a single text message to a string of numbers that belonged to the invisible people of the city. "The wind is rising," the message read. Within seconds, the slums began to stir. It started with the dock workers dropping their hooks, their eyes shifting toward the Iron Fang's warehouses. It moved to the street cleaners, the food delivery riders, and the homeless men huddled over fire barrels. For 3 years, Kim-joon had fed them, protected them, and treated them like human beings when the rest of the world looked through them. He hadn't just been living in poverty. He had been recruiting. At the South Wharf, a group of Iron Fang sentries stood guard, laughing as they smoked. They didn't notice the delivery rider who stalled his bike just around the corner to check his phone. They didn't notice the garbage collectors moving slowly down the street, noting every entrance and exit. They certainly didn't notice the street kids perched on the fire escapes, their small radios crackling with static as they relayed the movement of every black SUV. Information began to pour into Kim-joon's phone like a flood. He didn't need his father's satellite surveillance. He had thousands of pairs of eyes that the Iron Fang considered trash. Target spotted at Warehouse 4. A text from a fisherman read, 6 guards at the back gate. Message a local laundress. Hannah is on the 2nd floor. Confirmed a boy who had climbed the rafters. Kim-joon watched as the map of the Iron Fang's operation was laid bare before him. The syndicate thought they were hiding in a fortress, but they were actually sitting in a glass house. Every guard shift, every hidden weapon, and every escape route was now documented by the very people they had stepped on to build their empire. His father's army ruled through fear and expensive hardware, but Kim-joon's army ruled through loyalty and presence. They were everywhere, and because they were nobodies, they were invisible. The Iron Fang was looking for a storm on the horizon, but the flood was already at their feet. Kim-joon closed his phone and felt the cold steel of the blade's hilt. The Ghost Army was ready. It was time to show the Syndicate that the most dangerous weapon in the world wasn't a gun. It was the man who had the hearts of the forgotten. The South Wharf warehouse was a fortress of rusted iron and arrogance. Inside, the Iron Fang Syndicate had barricaded every door, their high-powered rifles aimed at the main entrance. They had scanners tuned to police frequencies, and thermal cameras watching the perimeter. Their leader paced the concrete floor, checking his watch every few seconds. He expected SWAT teams, flashing sirens, and a loud frontal assault. He was prepared for a war of technology and firepower. He wasn't prepared for the silence. Suddenly, the hum of the massive industrial generators died. The stadium-sized floodlights flickered once and plunged the warehouse into a thick, suffocating blackness. The Syndicate's high-tech security systems groaned and went offline. Panic shouts echoed through the dark as the gangsters struggled to switch on their tactical flashlights. "It's just a fuse," the leader screamed, drawing his pistol. "Stay on the doors. If anything moves, kill it." But the threat didn't come from the doors. It came from the shadows they had ignored for years. From ventilation shafts, the high rafters, and the loading bays, a silent tide began to pour in. There were no sirens, only the sound of heavy boots and the collective breathing of hundreds of men. When the Iron Fang finally clicked on their lights, they didn't see police uniforms. They saw the faces of the people they had robbed, beaten, and humiliated. They saw dock workers with iron pry bars, construction workers with heavy wrenches, and street kids with slingshots and stones. At the front of this massive, silent legion stood a single figure in a tattered, dirty hoodie. The light caught the edge of a black lacquered hilt peeking from his jacket. Kim-joon stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the beam of the leader's flashlight. "You!" The leader gasped, his hand shaking as he recognized the beggar from the construction site. "You're the one they're calling the Ghost? You're just a piece of trash." "This trash is the king of the streets you're standing on," Kim-joon said, his voice calm and terrifying. With a single wave of his hand, the legion moved. It wasn't a messy brawl. It was a disciplined, overwhelming wave. The nobodies didn't use guns. They used the tools of their trade to dismantle the Syndicate's gunmen before they could even find their targets in the dark. Kim-joon moved like a streak of lightning through the chaos, his signature blade still sheathed, but his strikes landing with lethal accuracy. The Iron Fang had prepared for a raid by the law. They had no defense against a revolution of the poor. As Kim-joon reached the stairs leading to the second floor, where Hannah was held, the beggar they had mocked was no longer a victim. He was a commander of an army that had existed right under their noses for 3 long years. The siege had begun, and the Syndicate's fortress was now their cage. The upper floor of the warehouse was a mess of shattered glass and broken crates. The Iron Fang leader backed away, his breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. He held a knife to Hannah's throat, but his hands were shaking so violently that the blade rattled against her skin. Behind him, the heavy steel doors groaned open. Nam-joon stepped into the room. The Mafia boss looked out of place in the grime, his silver-gray hair perfect and his red tie a sharp contrast against the shadows. He didn't look at the gunman. He looked only at his son, who stood in the center of the room with his signature blade still tucked in his jacket. "So," Nam-joon's voice echoed cold and smooth, "the ghost finally shows himself. Tell me, Juna, will you beg for her life, or will you let her die to protect your pride?" The Iron Fang leader laughed hysterically. "Yeah, listen to your father. Boy, one move and she's dead." Kim-joon didn't look at his father. He didn't look at the knife. He stared directly into the leader's eyes, his expression as flat and hard as a tombstone. "You think you're the one holding the power because you have a weapon," Kim-joon said. His voice was unervingly quiet. "But you've already lost. Look at your feet." The leader glanced down. Small, red laser dots covered his chest. Not from high-tech sniper rifles, but from cheap laser pointers held by street kids perched in the rafters above. Suddenly, a heavy iron bolt shot from a makeshift crossbow in the shadows, slamming into the leader's shoulder with a sickening thud. The knife dropped. Hannah scrambled away. In a flash, Kim-joon was across the room. He didn't use his sword. He caught the leader by the throat and pinned him against the corrugated metal wall. The Viper Prince didn't scream or show rage. He simply leaned in close, his face inches from the man who had mocked him. "You hunted a shadow for weeks," Kim-joon whispered. "You spent $500,000 to find a beggar. Here I am. Was it worth the price?" With a calculated, brutal efficiency, Kim-joon struck 3 pressure points on the man's arms and legs. The leader slumped to ground, paralyzed and sobbing, his dignity stripped away more painfully than any physical wound. Kim-joon stood over him, looking down not with anger, but with the cold detachment of a man who had seen the bottom of the world and no longer feared the dark. Nam-joon watched from the doorway, a rare, thin smile touching his lips. He saw the roughened hands and the dirty hoodie, but he recognized the spirit underneath. His son hadn't just survived the test of poverty. He had turned the streets into his own personal weapon. "You become a monster, June," Nam-joon remarked, walking forward. Kim-joon wiped a smudge of dirt from his cheek and looked at his father. "No, father, I became a king. You rule through fear. I rule through the people you forgot." The climax was over, but the air in the warehouse was heavier than ever. The heir had returned, and he was far more dangerous than the man who had sent him away. The sirens of police finally wailed in the distance, but inside the warehouse, the air was silent and heavy with history. Nam-joon reached into his coat and pulled out a silk box. Inside lay a deep red tie, the same shade as the one he wore. It was a symbol of the Gyeryong Empire's ultimate authority, a badge of blood, wealth, and absolute power that had been passed down for generations. "You have passed the crucible, Juna," Nam-joon said, his voice carrying a rare note of pride. "You have proven that you can endure the fire. Take this. Stand by my side, and we will crush anyone who dare to look down on you. The city will tremble at the mention of your name again." Kim-joon looked at the red tie, then at his own hands. They were stained with the dust of the construction site and the grease of the slums. He looked at Hannah, who was being shielded by a group of dock workers, and at the hundreds of nobodies who still stood in the shadows, waiting for his word. He reached out and took the tie. The silk felt strange and unnaturally smooth against his callous skin. For a moment, the guards and fallen Iron Fang members expected him to put on and return to the high-rise offices of the elite. Instead, Kim-joon gripped the silk and wrapped it tightly around his hand, using it as a bandage for a cut he had sustained during the fight. "I accept the throne, father," Kim-joon said, his voice steady and echoing to the rafters. "But the Gurion Empire you built died tonight in this warehouse. I will not rule from a limousine behind tinted glass. I will not rule through the fear of a gun or the weight of a bank account." He turned away from his father and looked toward his ghost army. The laborers, the couriers, and the forgotten stood tall, their eyes shining with a new kind of hope. "From this day forward," Kim-joon announced, "this empire belongs to the streets. We will protect the shops that were robbed. We will feed the children who are starving. We will be the shield for those who have no voice. My power doesn't come from your silk tie, father. It comes from the loyalty of every man and woman who knows what it's like to be invisible." Nam-joon watched in stunned silence as his son walked out of the warehouse, not into the waiting limousine, but into the crowd of common people. They parted for him not out of fear, but out of a deep, unshakable respect. The 3-year test had changed more than just a man. It had changed the foundation of an empire. Kim-joon kept his scarred hands in his dirty hoodie, ruling from the very alleys where he had once bled. The Prince of Scraps was gone. In his place stood a king of the people, and for the first time in history, the Gurion Empire truly belonged to the city. The Hidden Master's new life had finally, officially, begun.